NewTechLures.com. We're here with Bo James, and this is a little video we're shooting for our pro staff, and we're gonna go over some of the finer points of our product.
Okay, so a lot of you guys are wanting to know bullet points about the thing. Well, first thing is the iconic look of it. It has separated dual appendages, which are actually kind of like antennas, and I mean that's a look of our own. Trademarks are about images, and that image right there that belongs to us. The other thing are these flat eyes are also trademarked. So, you know, just the iconic look of the new jig is, I mean, when you see that, you know you're looking at a new jig. There's nothing else on the market like it. Now, as far as getting down to the nuts and bolts of this thing, the technology in it. A few of you guys have talked about this thing sits on the bottom like this, but it doesn't. It sits just like that when it comes to rest. Sits flat. Now, if you're in some rocky terrain, sometimes it's leaning over a rock or something, it'll rest like that, but on a flat surface it's going to like that. See, it rights itself every time. Slightest, just as soon as you pull it, it's just like a cat. And how it does that is in the design of the head, which I don't think I'll get into, because that's kind of like for me to know and all the other manufacturers try to figure out.
Yeah, get into a little bit of secrets there.
Yeah. Now these camming surfaces, if you look at the front of that thing, it's built like a screw thread actually. It's like it's got a big flat thread on either side. And what that does, that's how when it pulls through two parallel lines, one cam or the other is going to hit first, and it will physically twist that thing because it's like a thread. So as long as you're pulling on it, it's just like a screw. If you're putting pressure on a screw, it wants to twist itself, especially if it has a steep enough thread. And this is doing the same thing. So when you pull, it's actually twisting it. The other thing, if you understand the principle behind cams in a bow, if you shoot bows any, is the cams are elliptical, and so any radius from one point to another still has 180 degrees. But what's the shortest distance between 2 points? It's not going all the way around the curve. It's a straight line. So what happens by taking the radius out of that, up here on this front edge of this thing, you have an increased curve. But when you get that broke over, just like in the bow, once you break it over, it's easy to hold. But when you let it loose, how it gains its acceleration is it's going across the flat part of that cam. It's a shorter distance, and that's how it increases the speed. Well, this does the same thing. Once that cam breaks over, this thing will actually travel forward about 3/4 the length of that barb and start penetration of that hook.
Yeah, so even we're just getting into a little bit deeper physics here. It's hard enough to get people to even get their mind around the basic physics.
Yeah.
But for our pro staff, we just really want you to understand what's at play here. And like Bo's saying, you know, once it breaks that cam, this thing literally jumps forward quite a bit in the fish's mouth as it sets that penetrating set.
Yep. And also, because of the design of it, once it starts through the fish, the hook actually goes through the fish in an arc and not a straight line.
Yeah, that's a key point, is that it travels in an arc.
And that's another reason that it's so hard for a fish to get out of it. And after you guys get to catching fish on the thing, you'll realize that just trying to push it straight, trying to get the hook out, man, it's a hard job. But if you'll remember and try to roll it, it'll come out easier. but that just makes it harder for a fish to get rid of it too. You know, as I said before, a traditional center-based jig, you have the problem with the weed guard and the hook shank actually form a single angle plane. And as you collapse that down, it'd be like trying to shut a safety pin between two fingers. As you get enough pressure on it, and just about the time you get it closed, it wants to flip over on its side. Well, that's what happens when you pressure a single angle plane from two separate sides, is it actually travels in a spiral. And you know, a good example would be your spinnerbaits. You know, they're all built like a safety pin, and so as you pull it through the water, you're putting pressure on the head because of the drag on the head, and then your blade arm, which is the other, forms the other leg of the angle, the blades start getting pressure on them, and then it starts squeezing that thing together. And as you get enough pressure on it and enough speed, your spinnerbait lays over on the side.
Well,
Same.
We'll address spinnerbaits when we're ready to show ours.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that that's, you know, what happens. Okay, so at some point in time between the hook shank here and one of the guide arms, you have that same safety pin relation. But when you have that, you can see that because of the camming surface, and then actually this eyelet here is actually a lever, you have enough power that it pulls past that. And once it does, once it rotates the vertical, because the other guide arm is on a separate point, you know, on the other side of the center line of the hook, it locks it.
Yeah.
Can't go any further. So it's going to hook through the top of the head every time.
Locks it right into place and stabilizes it.
Yeah. So basically, most of the time when you hook a bass with this, it will be normally from in the parameters of from one eyeball to the other on the fish, because if the hook starts in right off of the camming surface, you know, you have that range right there. Once in a while, you'll hook a bass right out through the gill plate way back here, but that's because the hook started the instant that you pulled. And so, I mean, that's not a bad place either, because the gill plate's just as solid as bone. But most of the time, it'll be right between from one eyeball to the other. Now, there will be once in a great while, if you really dead center a bass right out here at the end of the mouth, where the lip structure is attached to the head, there's a patch of bone, you know, depending on how big the bass is, that is just, you can't hardly get anything through it. And once in a while, if you hit that dead center, and I've actually caught some bass where the new jig will actually go all the way through it, but I've also got flopped some in the floor that they were just hanging there. That piece of bone is so hard, it's just almost impossible to get a hook through it.
Just brought in, stuck right into bone.
Yep.
Yep. So the iconic look is one of the main things that you really want to stress is that cam head and that dual appendage separated point guide arm. They're on separate points.
Mm-hmm. You know, the other thing, like in the Pro Series, we've worked on this skirt collar, and the reason that this is better than I think most on the market is because the skirt band actually fits like it's supposed to. Number one, on a lot of them it doesn't set all the way in there, so we've made enough room in there so it sets. And the other thing is most of them, this diameter is too big and it leaves the skirt collar expanded. And so what happens when that rubber's expanded and you nick it just a little bit, it's just like stretching a rubber band out here and taking a razor and you give it a little nick, pops in two. Well, it's doing the same thing to your skirt collar band when that thing's expanded. So What this does, it allows it to collapse down to more normal size.
Lets it relax.
Yep, lets it relax, and you're not going to have any problems with it.
Another thing is, I don't know if Bo even wants to talk about this, but on a lot of jigs you'll notice this keeper barb is facing down, not up. And there's just so much physics at play with this jig. I don't even know if Bo wants to. Might as well. I've brought it out.
Yeah, well, the keeper barb being up here is for a reason. When you put it down here, that opens it up to being susceptible to hanging on something in the fish's mouth. You want that all that smooth. That's just, there's so many things that we could get into technology-wise about hooks. There's gobs of these new hooks coming out. There's these new straight shank hooks that they're pumping now, and it's got this big old keeper up there, and they're saying, oh, that's the greatest thing. Well, I can show you where that's going to cost you a lot of fish because it got problems.
Everything about this jig is designed and thought through. Like he was saying, this keeper barb, it's up because on the bottom, as you set the hook in the fish's mouth, it's resistance.
Yep.
As it travels across that parallel plane, that's resistance. So
well, anything that can hang and prevent forward motion of the jig, then you're not going to get the hook stuck. So, I mean, if you have something up here and it prevents that jig from moving forward, then how are you going to get the hook through the fish? Because you stop forward motion of the hook point.
That's just another thing that we've put out there. I mean, any jig company can now make a better jig that we've just explained why we do what we do. But we want you to know all the finer points of it and all the physics and thought process and science and testing that's been into this thing. It's just unreal.
Oh yeah, something else too that came to mind when I was talking about how this thing falls. There's a couple guys talking about, well, this thing falls straight down.
No,
it doesn't. The weight balance in this thing, you don't. And really, most of the jigs on the market fall straight down like this. In fact, they almost will turn an outside loop. Well, there's nothing in the natural world that can turn an outside loop.
No crawdad goes down like that.
Nope. And so the way this thing actually falls is more about like this. And also, there's something about these camming surfaces that I won't even get into, but they are made in a special way so as this thing falls, it actually will start turning off. There's sometimes, if it's falling from enough distance, as it falls, it'll actually end up falling back towards you a certain amount. And that's what triggers strikes. The other thing
breaks off like a bait fish.
Yep. When this pulls across stuff, most jigs on the market, when they pull over something, and you can do this by yourself, just take a regular old jig that they've been selling, and when you pull it across something, instead of sliding over it goes like this, like you're trying to climb the fence. Well, stuff in nature doesn't do that either. The new jig, because of its design, the cams and the guide arms work in conjunction with each other, and so when it comes over stuff, when you pull it up over, it always rolls on the axis of the hook shank. So it never goes like this, it always rolls over stuff.
Right.
And that rolling motion triggers strikes. You know, if you've ever watched shad around a tree, moving around, and they'll hit a tree limb, they got that roll and that flip.
It's a more natural move,
that the original Rapala was always such a great fish catcher, because not only did it have this wobble, it had a roll in it. And that roll is what really triggers the strikes.
Thanks for taking the time to talk to the pro staff, Bo. We really appreciate it.